Nikki, welcome to the Business Growth Mindset podcast. We are featuring top achievers in this series, and you are one of them. As you know, I'm a big fan. So welcome.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for having me. Top achiever. I don't know that I've got that on my CV yet, but very complimentary.
I think you're very humble, and I certainly think that once we rattle off your CV, it'll become very apparent of the kind of top achiever you are. You're the owner of the famed Star of Greece at Port Wollonga. I'm happy to say that I was there again only about 7 or 8 weeks ago. The portaloos were still there. The renovation is... How are we going with the renos?
Look, what is ever on time and on budget? Look, we're pretty good. I mean, we've done all the budgeting around probably just over 12 months ago. So we are a little bit over. We'll probably rein it in around about 15% over, which is not too bad when you consider, trades and anything building. And we're on track to open at the end of November. So we're pretty happy with what we've been able to do.
The steak tartare was awesome on the brioche.
Yeah.
Oh, delicious. Honestly, like Lucy and I looked at each other and we were there for Cassie Young Barnes' birthday.
Right.
So
okay.
I say 6 weeks, but we've been about that, yeah. And I remember someone said to me, I think you said to me actually, walking through the chamber, like, we still got these portaloos, and I was expecting them to be really bad, but they weren't. They were actually all quite nice and hidden away, and it was great. We had a really enjoyable lunch, and
Fantastic.
The staff were excellent. You're a mum, you're a wife, you're the chair of Business SA, you're also on the Chamber of Commerce Australia board, the Adelaide Economic Agency and Tourism, Retail, Hospitality Services Industry Skills Council's chair. You have an impressive pedigree in destination marketing, both here in Adelaide and in Melbourne. You've also developed a series of your own startups. You also had Seymour Solutions, which was a play on your actual maiden name, right? So I thought that was very clever. It's interesting. I never knew that until I was doing some research. Like, I knew the business, but I never thought of the name, or played on name, until I was like, hang on a minute. Now I get this, right? You've had a lot of work in membership organisations. I mean, your days at Advantage SA, which then became Brand SA, and not-for-profit sector. But you also have held many, many chair roles, and you also went back to uni on top of all that and went and did your law degree. So I remember when you were graduating, you actually spoke at an alumni ICHO event, Adelaide Oval, and that was like, you're like, yes, that's it, I've just finished. And I think that was just before the crazy thing called COVID came to our shores. Before we dive into this podcast, how do you do it all?
I'm highly organised, and I think I sort of have to be, really. Maggie's just started school. That's my nearly 10-year-old. Started school in Adelaide, and so I'm in Adelaide most days, so it's a little bit of travel coming from Port Wollonga, but I definitely try and plan my day as best as I possibly can, because then you know that you're going to hit a brick wall or open a can of worms. It's something I've realised, being from doing events 30 years ago, is that there's always going to be something that will be thrown at you. So what sort of state of mind are you in to be able to cope with that? I think that's the best thing. This year I've actually done a lot of travel, but just sort of little short holidays and taking a break. I mean, you can never take a break totally, but I do think it really helps, and get into a book and try and sort of have a bit of time off, but I do like to juggle.
Oh, you do, right? Look, one of the things that it's been amazing meeting so many people on the podcast so far, and you sit back and you look at everyone and you think, when you are someone who gets a lot of things done, you think you're kind of solo. I know one of your CEOs, Martin Hazy, and also a friend of ours, and Martin, I see him a lot in the corridors, and we always look at each other and go, how do we fit it all in? And then while I've interviewed all of these amazing people, it's like, hang on a minute, everyone's the same, we're in the same boat. It's just finding ways to juggle it. But I think there's something deeper than that, and hopefully that's what we're going to uncover today in the podcast. So before we dive into the podcast, do you want to share anything about you in particular that, maybe just give the audience a little bit more sense of who you are and what you stand for? Because I think, you certainly stand for a lot of things. I mean, there isn't many women who have carved an impressive career on professional boards. I think that's probably the one thing that's always admired about you. You really got into that really early in your career, and you've evolved and developed. And as a chair, I think that you've really taken those skills on board. But in terms of sharing with our audience, so they get to know a little bit more about who Nikki is, I'm just going to give you the mic.
Sure. I was certainly not the girl at school that was going to be, becoming a Rhodes Scholar. In fact, I was probably much more known for being the very, very naughty person at school, which may not surprise you, Christian. Of course, I think all of your listeners would go, that is so surprising. I can't believe she was so naughty. I was lucky not to have been expelled, probably. And I certainly wasn't scholastically, super either. But I think that from a really young age, I worked out, where do I want to be in 2 years' time? Who do I need to know, and what do I need to know to get there? And that's something that I've been doing probably over the last 30 years. I studied tourism at TAFE and went and worked in London and here in travel, and that was, fantastic. And I think, I remember going for my interview at TAFE to study tourism. They said, why do we think you should? I'm a people person, I'm great with people. And funnily enough, I actually think now that's probably what is my strength, is that I am a people person, and so much about what I have to do now, whether it's in boards or in the restaurant, is actually pull people together. Yeah. Pull people together, get the right group of people, the right skills. I'm huge on diversity, and not just gender. I think you can do really well, and whether it's a workplace or in a board, to bring together people of different genders, different age groups, different ethnicities. You can then create that environment where you can encourage success, encourage teamwork, and then, as a great old boss of mine, she's now a senator, Anne Ruston, and she said to me, somebody said to her, congratulations on this great event. She said, don't thank me, thank the people I've employed. I'll take credit for hiring them, but they've done this event, and it's really something I think that stood with me in a long time as well. So, I worked in travel. I then started my own business, and that was great. And I think I learned, everybody that says I will definitely give you work is not the people that give you work. But
that's actually a really good lesson there for anyone listening. That if some of our younger audience that are looking at starting a business, is do not rely on who you think is going to give you work. Because it often is not the case. In fact, it's rarely the case. So I'm glad you said that, actually, because that's something that I think people tend to forget. They go in with all these aspirations and think, oh yeah, I know all these people and they're going to support me. And you quickly realise that's not how it works.
No, and I mean, I am particularly, when I talk about being highly organised, I can't stand not having an email that's been addressed at the end of the day, and a phone call that hasn't been addressed, even if it's a message to say, I'll call you tomorrow. For me, that's about respecting whoever has taken the time. I learned a really good lesson from my dad. I worked for him in the family business when I was straight after school. And I remember, I'll never forget this, I answered the phone. I said, is David Seymour Smith available? And I said, no, I'm sorry. Sorry, madam. Mr. Seymour Smith is currently busy, but I can get him to call you later. And Dad hauled me into his office and absolutely tore strips off me. I said, what did I say? He said, you said I was busy. And he said, and don't you think the person on the end of the phone was busy? And it's something that's really stuck with me for a long time, and we are all so busy, aren't we? I mean, COVID hit and we said, I'm never going to be this busy. I'm going to make sure that I take stock and I have a better work-life balance. But that is definitely, and then of course we've got busy again. But everybody's in that same boat, and it's a bit of that respectful piece, I think. No one's ever busier than yourself. And
so have you never said you're busy since?
No.
What do you use? This would be great. So what do you use instead?
Well, I think, look, I'm just attending to somebody else at the moment. But your query is important. I mean, it is a little bit standard when you listen to some of those messages. If you're on hold for Qantas for 2 hours, and then they're saying your call is important to us. Really? I just think it's about being respectful of other people's time, and so I'm always on time. Apart from today, when I did get held up for a couple of minutes.
It's interesting. The first thing you said to me, I'm sorry, I was on this call. I'm like, it's cool, I get it. It's all right. It happens. It's actually really interesting, Nikki. I'm known for being meticulously on time. So, and I think I would say that I'm probably not the most organised person, but I have an EA who has an EA and a whole bunch of people around me that keep me organised and keep me on track. But I think that that's a really interesting thing. Being organised is really important when you're spinning plates. It's and I think that's probably, and I'm going to say we as hospitality people and tourism people, you learn that really early because it's an industry that forces you to multitask, but not from an unfocused perspective, if you know what I mean. Like, there are lots of people that, are high achievers or top achievers come from very different industries, and hospitality is rarely one of them because the margins are narrow and, there's all these, COVID has completely disseminated most of the industry, but, South Australians and other people in Australia have really come back and supported these businesses, and I think people underestimate how hard it is to make real money in a hospo business.
But we've had to do things differently, and I think that's. I don't think you can ever sit there and sort of put the hand out and say, "Give me money, give me support." It has been tough, and we're still only operating at 75%. But last year in October or November, we made some fundamental changes to the way that we operate our business. And we said, in fact, if I want to get 100 people of a day, there is a risk we'll drop back from 75% to 50%. So we did double sittings. So we've future-proofed our business to say we're going to do double sittings, and on weekends now it's a minimum of 2 courses. So what that's meant is when we have gone into some sort of change in restrictions, we've been able to future-proof it. Now, hospitality industry will be saying, that's it, I hope. It's double sittings forever and ever and ever now.
And it's brilliant because I remember doing, when I had all the restaurants, we were, I think at XO, we were the first venue, period, to take deposits on bookings. And we're talking 2006. And the industry was condemning, like, what are you doing? How dare you? Customers are like, how dare you? How arrogant are you? I'm like, mate, we have a lineup at the door. Like, I can't take anyone in. And if you don't turn up, I've just lost all this money because now the people that used to line up aren't lining up because they go, why would I line up to get into a restaurant? And I think people didn't quite understand, but I've seen that transition now where restaurateurs have finally gone, we've got a license to be able to actually change for better practice. And consumers have gone, yeah, great, I get it. Like, I mean, I'm the kind of person, I book the 8:30 table or the late sitting because you do not want me out of your restaurant because I spend.
Well, that's
right? And so I think that's the biggest problem, right? Like, and I've spoken to a lot of our friends, some of ours in common, that, they're like, Christian, that's the biggest challenge we've had, is being able to pinpoint the customer that's like you, who is an ex-industry person, who will have 3 courses. Clearly, I look like I carry 3 courses, but, I'll have 3, 4 courses and I'll drink 2 or 3 bottles. To me, it's still entertainment. Like, with 2 children at home, like Lucy and I rarely get the chance to go out. When we do, I don't want to be told that I have to leave. And so even now when we like go to Nido and stuff, because it's around the corner, and I'll ring up and I'll say, it's Christian. They're like, don't worry, you can have the early sitting, you can stay for as long as you like. I'm like, thanks, I'm just letting you know that, I'm prepared to come in and I just want to sit there. It's the only time we get off. And for us, it's midweek anyway. So, mother-in-law will take the kids or my mum, and so we'll just head off for 3 hours, and it's like, it's our time. But it's wonderful that you've been able to make those changes. So using COVID positively has served a better purpose, I think, for the industry wide, but also for you guys.
Absolutely. And we've there is a tourism industry development fund, which is a 30% supporting venues. We've taken that up to do our significant expansions, and we've been able to bring that forward. We'd sort of put that off for a while, given that we probably dropped about 500,000 or 600,000 last year.
You would have been hard because tourism is really a big part of your business. But I think, do you think that the South Australians have supported you more though during this time? Because
I think once we reopened, there's no doubt about that, and we've looked at some of the periods this particular calendar year, and we've had much stronger months than we've had from 2019 and before that. So I think regional tourism has done very well for some businesses. Others haven't done so well, and the other part that's sort of challenging with it is skill shortages.
Yeah.
So I know there are regional businesses around our area in McLaren Vale and Fleurieu Peninsula that they can't open to capacity because they can't get the staff. So that's been really, really challenging. We are lucky, we've got great staff at the Star and at the Victory as well. But
let's
we
not
want
forget
them to
you've also got the Victory. So, Doug's down there, this is what I'm saying, you guys actually juggle a lot.
We do. We keep him at the Victory and I'm more at the Staff or in the city. It's good for our relationship. Family businesses are very, very challenging.
And you've grown up in a family business.
I did, yeah.
Tim's now taken reign of the family business, and Tim's your brother.
Yes.
We know each other well. So, but, it's one of those things. Nikki, we're talking about family businesses, right?
Yeah.
And just quickly, but what would you think in your childhood shaped the type of business person that you've become today?
Well, I worked from a really young age in the business. It was WA Young & Co back then, and it was shade cloth wholesale, retail and manufacture. My uncle worked there, mum and dad worked there, and I loved it. In fact, I wanted to take over the business when I was, quite young, and Dad said, "Oh no, you're not really smart enough. Come on, he'll kill me for saying that."
Really say that? Wow.
And he said, "No, Tim will be doing that."
Yeah. He would have said that. Tim would have loved it.
But I loved it. Worked on the factory floor. I would be cutting up shade cloth. I'd be selling and customers, and I learnt a great deal from my mum and dad, and my uncle Craig as well. Was really where I got. My Uncle Craig was terrific at technology, and the 12-inch floppy disks, it's a long way back, but he taught me about coding and using computers from absolutely. And in fact, I remember Mum's job was to actually manage the books. So they had these huge cash books, that you opened up and had
journals.
20 different columns, and we weren't allowed to go home until Mum had balanced the books. And so I remember just going, we've got to find a solution for this. So I actually wrote a program to take the cash books onto like a modern day spreadsheet, if you like, and therefore if you've entered it once, there's no reason why it's not going to balance. It's going into a spreadsheet.
Amazing.
Anyway. So I said, this is great. This means, Mum, that we're not going to have to work back late because I've been able to develop this program.
And
Dad just said, solve the problem. He said, listen, smartass, I think it's time you went to uni now. So
so anyway, you achieved greatness, solved a problem, and then he ships you off to uni.
He ships me off. But that's so. I think that I certainly give my parents a great deal of credit about a work ethos. I think was also pretty fundamental. My parents worked really, really hard. In addition to the family business that they had, my mum would also be working weekends as a nurse, and that was all about providing for Tim and I, my brother, and being able to send us to private school. That was important to them. Dad didn't have that when he grew up, my mum did, but it was something that they thought was really important. So I think when you are, from an early teenager, involved in a family business where you can learn so much from your parents, it's really helped shape me. And again, I look at the way I really observed, I remember from a young age observing the way that Dad treated his staff and the team and recognising them. I think that was firmly entrenched for me at a very young age. I was very, very lucky to have that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I grew up in a family business in catering, and so it was the last thing I ever wanted to get into. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Weekends, washing dishes at the age of 12, earning $20. For my time, I was like, this is ridiculous, and then I ended up in the industry. It's one of those things, but I think it's working in a family business definitely teaches you work ethic, because a lot of people don't realise the mum and dad businesses are hard work. No matter how big they get, they're always hard work. But I love your point about how your parents treated their employees. And I think that's really important, because that's probably set you up to where you are now in terms of being able to work with all these diverse groups of people to achieve a common goal. Because realistically, a lot of your chair roles and a lot of your board positions are not in the industry that you're in. You bring a lot of independence to, you were Volleyball SA, I think, for some time as well, and you've had a varying bunch of roles, Red Cross, I think, by memory.
Yes,
Because that was when I first met you, was right then and there. I think it was early 2000. So I got back to Australia, I think, into 2001. And you were really active in all of these spaces. And I think that that now paints a picture to me as to how you've developed. And it's not in any of the questions, but I'm really intrigued because I don't think I would ask you, why did you buy the Star? Because all things you could have done.
So I had been living in Melbourne and I was looking after the general manager for marketing and communications for the Melbourne Convention Bureau, which was great. And that was at a time, it was pre-GFC, and so there was money aplenty to be marketing Melbourne for major events. And there was a new Hilton being built, a new Crown being built, a new convention centre. So it was a really crazy time. And anyway, I said the only one job that I'd come back to is if SA Great CEO role became available. Anyway, Judy Potter left.
That's right.
I came back, and after about a year in the role where I was head focused, my dad, Tim, and I went to the Victory Hotel for a drink, and at the front bar we just happened to bump into a guy in a Mickey Mouse t-shirt, and he thought I was with my brother because he didn't realise that, Anyway, that happened to be Doug. And so Doug, who'd had the Victory Hotel then for about 20 years, and my father had met him previously, so he introduced us, and the rest is history, I suppose, in terms of Doug and I getting together. But we both had a separate affection for the Star of Greece. I'd been going there for many years with friends, and Doug, of course, had been living down there around the corner from there. And what happened, we'd got together, and then, a year or so down the track, we moved fairly swiftly, and we were on IVF and trying to have a child. And I was, still in this SA Great job, and I realised fairly quickly that working a full day, having an embryo transfer, rushing back to work and having multiple failures, strangely enough, was probably not the right environment. So we decided to de-stress, buy the Star of Greece, and keep going on IVF.
Are you kidding? So hang on a sec. Normally people would not associate with de-stressing buying a restaurant.
Yeah, no.
Because that's what I was wondering.
Yes.
Because I remember you guys having a difficult period trying to have a baby, and and then you had some challenges after that too.
Yes.
And that's why Maggie's like a miracle. Right?
She actually is a genuine miracle. Yeah. So we both we thought it would be. So I obviously moved down to live with Doug in Port Wollonga. Star of Greece came up. Doug was also building a second restaurant at Aldinga, which we ended up sort of pulling out of down the track, but. It came up, we thought it would be great. I'd worked in hospitality years ago, so we thought that sort of the combined talents would be able to...
And you've done a fantastic job.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, it's I remember when Kylie Minogue thought it was the most happening fish and chips on the planet. Has she been back and seen the transformation?
She hasn't been back, but her dancers have, and her staff have when she was touring. So we thought we would buy the place, and that would be great. And but credit to we've had an incredible team, and in fact one of the staff, our head chefs, just decided to move on after he's been with the Victory and the Star for over 10 years.
Wow.
He's moving on. We're elevating our sous chef and another casual chef up into a joint head chef roles, but Brett was a terrific chef, and that's a big part of it. I think he's taken a bit of a break from hospitality. He's been cooking for
tough gig being in the kitchen.
It is a tough gig being in the kitchen. But I think that's another thing that has always been important to me, is looking at succession planning and future proofing. It's really important. I mean, we'd only had the business for 6 months. We were coming into our first summer, and then bang, I was taken out of the business for nearly 12 months with Maggie coming so premature.
Yeah.
So that sort of is another thing I think that's really important in whatever you do, is making sure that you've got, what does succession plan look like? And if somebody of a key person is taken out of the business, how can you make sure that that's not going to stop you? And often chefs can be, they can be that person.
Picking will be quite difficult.
Yeah, and they can be challenging.
I used to be one too. So
They can be. So I think that's another part of it.
Yeah.
So when our head chef is gone, we've moved very, very, very swiftly to make sure that we've got continuing.
Considerably established now, and I mean, the Star and the Victory both have excellent reputations. I mean, and by excellent I mean excellent, not loosely. I mean, they're institutions. I know that when we go up to Karakalinga, we always end up at the Victory at some point, and then on the way back, and we'll try and get down to the Star. And I mean, the wonderful thing is they're two locations that are close. I mean, you think people in Sydney commute an hour and a half just to get to work. I remember when I used to live in Sydney, and I was in North Sydney, and literally it would take me 45 minutes to get to work, and you could walk it in a shorter period of time. And then to think that you can get to the Star in 45 minutes from Adelaide. So it's wonderful. You've had a lot of challenges. You've had some real life challenges while building an incredible career. And we all know that business is not all flowers and rainbows. Has there been a particular failure experience in your career, in your life, that you think set you up later? I mean, you've had a lot of things that have happened to you that I think you've built grit and resilience along the way.
Yeah.
But in terms of business, has there been any kind of failure experience that you go, yep, that moment, I remember it, and it did set me up for later on?
Look, we bought the Star, it's 10 years ago now, and John Lethlean came 2 months into us having the restaurant and wrote one of the most scathing reviews. He likes to do that with a few places in South Australia. And I remember...
The Age?
The Australian. The Oz, yeah. And so we've been, going for 2 or 3 months, this just absolutely shocking review. And I was pregnant at the time, and I've waddled into the Star, and Dougie's rung me and said, we've got a pretty shocking review. And I've walked in, and there were just messages after messages, cancelling and cancelling and cancelling and cancelling. And it went on for weeks. And I think that, it was quite a harsh lesson for us. I rang everyone back because they just said, I'm cancelling. And I'd ring them back and I'd say, look, I understand it. What's the reason you've cancelled? Well, it's this shocking review. And that, we certainly, encountered some other personal challenges as well, but that was a big one for me. And I think it's also a bit like you look at the nasty reviews that you can get on TripAdvisor, and sadly the people that have a great time are probably not those ones that that write the good reviews. It's really those people with not as much time on their hands that do that. It was a shake-up for us. We probably didn't have the right team at the time. We inherited a team. We really wanted to give them the opportunity to shine, but I think probably what we should have done was, make those changes early. I think you need to surround, it for me was this whole thing about surrounding yourself. What are the skills that I have? What don't I have? And who do I need to bring in to have those skills? And what's really important for us? The Star had a checkered history. It had had some great times. It was in Gourmet Traveller, and it was, it had been in Quotas magazines. It had a fantastic reputation. Just prior to us getting it, it started to be a little bit erratic. Yeah. So it really for us said, well, what do we want from this business? What do we want it to look like? What does consistency in service look like? What is consistency in food? Do we want to be a fine dining restaurant? Is that really what we want to do? Or is it about bums on seats and all of those things? So I think it really did give us the opportunity to really think about what the Star, what we wanted to do with it. And there are many businesses that have received reviews, whether they're from John Lethlean or from other journalists that have killed them.
It could. Oh.
So, that was a pretty tough. I've given up my job, a really secure job at Advantage SA. I'd moved down there to be with Doug, and all of a sudden this business that we thought was going to be our future. So that was a pretty tough one to go through, but here we are now 9 years later, and we got through that. Working in a family business, I sometimes forget that Doug and I working together is a family business. It is. And everybody says to you, right, as long as you've got defined roles, you can make it work.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's
the case.
No. I think because look, I haven't been in businesses my whole life. I know exactly how difficult. I mean, Lucy and I now work together, but she not so much by choice, you would argue. But she leads our whole graphic design team in the media business, and she's just got a knack and an eye for design, and so I try and stay out of it. But when I give her instructions, she just looks at me with resistance, and I'm just like, honey, I am the company boss. Doesn't matter how you look at it. You can deal with me at home later, but right now you just have to do what you're told. And it is so hard to juggle because I'm a real alpha, so it's also very hard. But I'm blessed. 90% of our staff are women across, and 6 of my companies are female led. They just have me as the guy at the back that just approves things if I have to. But it is a challenge working with the person that you love the most in the world.
Why do you think I'm doing board work?
to get out as much as possible. or hang on, you now have a board that manages both organisations, and you say to him, honey, I'm the chair.
Well, I think in all seriousness, I did think, really did look at sort of a strategic change to say, my marriage is really important. We've got a beautiful child together, and we came together late in life. We're both A-type personalities. We both have, run business ventures before. And so in all seriousness, for me to sort of go down this journey of board work was a really deliberate strategy.
Deliberate strategy, and that's worked out exceptionally well for you. I mean, you're in a position where you can influence change, and that's what I admire. Really influence change. You're a minority in the context that there are not many women who have the chair roles that you have, and I think it's just the tip of the iceberg still for you. You have the year of ministers, and you can influence change at a very high level. And what I admire most is that you come from that working background. You come from an industry that doesn't have people in leadership positions. Some of us have gone through that path and failed and come back, but you're showing that that resistance and that integrity. The work that you do at the Chamber with Business SA, and then the skills councils, and you really have carved a career. And I remember when we spoke about when I asked you at that event, law degree, why? And and I remember you saying, well, look, where I'm heading, it's kind of something I've always wanted to do. And I think you've also proven to people that you can come from events and tourism and actually be taken seriously, and actually bring diversity and create a divergence of ideas and bring people together. And that's my observation. I know it's the observation of many people.
Thank you,
Nikki, so it's not just my own. When you're overwhelmed, and you've had these moments, right? So when you're overwhelmed or unfocused, is there something in particular that you do to realign?
It's funny, I spoke at a mental health breakfast, or provide an introduction for that a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I addressed this point because I knew that I'd taken on too much, and I wanted to be held accountable to the 300 people in the audience there, because I think that helped me. And I said, right, that is it. I'm putting up my hand to say I've taken on too much and I need to make some changes. And in fact, I've given notice to finish up with the Skills Commission at the end of this year.
Oh, wow.
Then I got a call from Canberra asking if I could go on the National Australia Day Council board, which was quite an honour. So I've accepted that. So I still that's kind of one in, one out. It's not quite working well for me. But I am looking at, I'll have been with Business SAs on the board for 9 years next year.
Yeah.
3 as deputy chair, and then it'll be 3 as chair. So I'm now looking at a succession plan there to sort of pass that back.
You got some good people on there.
Yeah, on the board. So
JJ's
we're sort of
on there. You can always handle
that's
JJ.
it.
He needs another role, doesn't he?
He needs another role. So I have recognised that I have become kind of a little overwhelmed, and I like to think that I'm a duck, that is relatively smooth on the surface, but I'm just imminently conscious of, I just don't want to be that person that gets sick and says, gosh, I should have slowed down. So I actually think I'm definitely in this position now over the next 12 months is really sort of perhaps bringing the number of things that I've been committed to down a little.
Thank you. Some warning.
And just can you give me some warning?
Let me tell you how it's going to play out. You've already experienced it. The moment you give up something, there'll be something else that comes to you, right? And I know this because I'm in the privileged position where things like that happen to me all the time. And I did this 3 years ago where I said, let's sell everything, let's get out of Adelaide, let's move on. And for a whole bunch of reasons. And Lucy agreed. And then when I did that, I went, well, hang on a minute, we've kind of retired now. In a very privileged position where we're going, hang on, I didn't realise that the exits would end up like this. And so I thought, I'm going to just take it easy. No. Now I wasn't competing with anybody, so guess what? Every phone call I got was, would you like to come and do some advisory work for us? And now I have an advisory firm that's the biggest business that I've owned out of all the businesses that I've had. And the challenge is that every time I turn down something else pops up. And here's what I have done, and this I know you'll do the same. I just worked out, this is who I am, and this is me. I know it sounds like a song, but that is exactly what I am. So I can't change who I am, but what I can do is be really selective about what I take on, and if it does not fulfill my purpose, I won't do it, because if it does fulfill my purpose, it's filling my cup up, right? And that's why we're very similar. I think you do the same, Nikki. You just got to work out what's good for you, but you've got Maggie, I've got Leo and Lavender. To me, my children are everything. So, I make no compromises on pickups and drop-offs because I can have those conversations in the car. And mine are still very little. I mean, Maggie's 10, right?
Yeah, she's just about 10.
Whereas, Leonardo's 6 turning 7. That sounds very hard. Lavender's 3 turning 4. And, I think to myself, I want to see these children grow up, and I actually want to have a relationship with them, because that's probably the one thing. Growing up in a family business, probably I don't know what your experience was, but I never got to see my parents very much, and unless I went to work. So the relationship I had with my father was, when I wasn't being beaten up, it was like, okay, I need to go to work to hang out with this person. I don't want that for my kids. And so I think it's about making really critical choices, but knowing what we stand for. But you, unfortunately, have a lot to do, because you are now in a position where you can inspire a new breed of women who want to make their way through. Does that make sense? Like,
it's very
but I mean that. And your name comes up in conversation in the circles that we work in, and to me, that's what I find inspiring, because I want my daughter to look at someone like you and say, you know what, I can have a career in any field and I can still end up doing this if that's what I want to do. And I think that's really important. That's, unfortunately for you, part of the mental load that you've got to take on top of everything else that you've got, being a wife and a mother and, a businesswoman, because, I think people underestimate the role of a chair. I found it really difficult becoming a chair. I really sucked at it because I talk too much. And I had to really sit back and, lucky that I had some really good mentors, guys like Eric Granger, and who really said, hang on, you've got to learn to shut up when you're sitting at the end of that table, and you've got to listen. And then you've got to get everyone's ideas around the table and work. And it turns out now that I have 6 independent chair jobs, and it's like, okay, I get it. And I can influence more by, getting everyone else to contribute as opposed to being the one contributing all the time. But I think that's what I admire about where you're going. But your biggest challenge is going to be, fulfilling all these roles that you're playing, and still managing the Star.
Look, and I have to say, I'm not, so much at the Star that often these days. We've got some fantastic managers that we, have supported and developing. So that's less of my stress, if you like. That's going well. Doesn't mean to say you can't lose sight of it, because that's an important thing. But I will take your advice, and I hope that I can really make those decisions that are, and I do want to be able to. I want Maggie to grow up knowing that you can do whatever you want. Your grades at school don't define you. unlike Adelaide, your football team, doesn't define you. You know, you can, and where you're from,
Thank goodness.
all of those things that we're branded. What school did you go to? What footing? All of those things that nothing really defines you, and you can really do. We live in an exceptional country. We live in a fantastic state, and we are blessed. And I genuinely think that. I think I've been fortunate just to have been able to just go in a direction that I've been able to enjoy and been given incredible opportunities.
Did you ever think, let's rewind 30 years ago, right? Not 30, actually 20. Let's just rewind 20 years ago. Did you think you would be where you are today in terms of, I think you'd always could imagine juggling more than one thing, but did you have this vision then, or was it? Because you said to me earlier in the podcast that it was very intentional, the path that you went down, particularly with the board roles.
Yes.
But if we go back 20 years ago, where do you think that tipping point came? Because I can see why it was intentional.
I probably, growing up, always wanted to, have a family and have a couple of kids. So that plan is thwarted if you don't have successful relationships.
Yep.
So perhaps out of adversity, perhaps that was it. But I did. So
really, that tipping point was you and Doug getting together, having going down the IVF path, having Maggie, and then kind of going, that's it. I can't juggle all of this. I want my marriage to be.
Yeah, I think from that, but I was doing board work. Even at advisory committee and
Volleyball SA was 2000, right?
That's right, and Red Cross. I started on a committee and I worked on variety, so a lot of that sort of committee type work I really enjoyed.
Was that though because of the events industry stuff?
Yeah, probably. I think that probably would have been where I was able to, be able to contribute, and to be able to contribute, which then raised funds, which helped. Right. Whether it was Red Cross or Variety, that was probably it for me. And I had something that became useful for charities, and that sense of giving I loved, and really being able to contribute. So I guess sort of going from committees then into boards sort of was a natural progression. But yes, probably it was after Maggie in the last 8 years. But Nigel McBride approached me, so he was my former chair at Advantage SA and SA Great. And
we're actually sitting in his old office.
We are indeed.
His desk used to be here. There used to be the round table right here. Yeah.
So Nigel approached me to go on the Business SA board, as I say, around about 9 years ago, and I didn't think that I wasn't confident that I had something to contribute, and he was very enthusiastic for me and very supportive of the contribution I could make. So. That's kind of how that journey started. Okay. And I think that I've always thought that, being very grateful to be on the board of Business SA, and I think as I've spent more time, it's really been able to give back. It's all volunteer, and, it's been a great experience for me.
Yeah. I think because you've been chair now, 3
It's coming up 3 years.
Yeah, so pretty much the transition from Nigel to Martin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, look, yeah, I'm very blessed that my offices are located in the West Wing.
Absolutely.
Here at the Chamber. So, and I was saying this to Martin. I think that the Business SA has done an exceptional job in what they've done. It's become very member centric. In a significant way, contributing. And I think that obviously as the chair, you've played a significant role in that. But. I think what's really interesting about the question that I asked you, it's what I've noticed and what I'm reflecting on is that you had an idea of what you wanted to do, didn't kind of know how to do it. I think that the role you played at Advantage SA, which was SA Great that changed name, was also excellent. And that was a big role to fill post Judy. And Judy was one of my mentors for a long time, still a dear friend. But I think that there was this. I think that's what kind of the ability, but it's like you said, you had to find someone that had enough faith in you to go, hey, Nikki, you can do this next job. Because one of the common themes that we found as I've interviewed all these top achievers is we all don't think we can do it. Like somewhere down the line, there is an element of imposter syndrome but it's not something that holds us back, right? Does that make sense?
I'm giggling because when the Vincent Tremaine was the former chair of Business SA and I had been the deputy chair, and he sort of said to me, I think you'd be a great chair. And I was like, I don't know if I can do it, Vincent. And anyway, I spoke to a few friends, and Ali Clark's a great friend of mine, and we often are engaging in our business decisions and talking with each other about what to do. And I rang her and I said, Ali, I've been sort of, a couple of board members have suggested I could do it, and she said, God, she said, this is what drives me nuts with women, because we will think of all of the things,
all the reasons why you can't do it.
All the reasons why I can't do it. She said, so I said, what do you, of this role do you think you can do? I think I can do this, but I don't have as much experience in policy development, and I haven't had as much experience in this. And she said, and if you were a man, you'll be saying, I've been asked, therefore I can, which is a gross generalisation, an absolute gross generalisation.
You know what's funny though? I could see how that plays out for a lot of men. It's like, I've been asked. It's like, sure, I must be good.
Sure,
it's so true though.
And we do, and I do, and I know even with other positions, I would analyse the position description absolutely line by line and look and focus on those 2 or 3 things that I might not have done before. Whereas now I would say, I can do that. I just need to hire somebody who can do those things that I can't do.
Yeah.
And it no longer scares me, I guess, in terms of, we can't all do everything. So just admit the areas where you're lacking in skills and look at how you can bring those people in to support you and give them acknowledgement for that contribution. Absolutely.
I mean, Moira Ware actually said it's manage your assets. So she, and I thought this was genius when I interviewed her, because I'm one of those people that says play to your strength and outsource your weaknesses. Okay, and you sort of said similar in your own words. But she kind of said, because she made this point about manage your assets, and your assets are your strengths.
Yes.
And I thought,
flip it.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, And so it's really amazing just listening to everyone. But it's so true. No matter how confident we are, or the perception that we give about our confidence, we all have enough self-doubt. But certainly women, the one thing that I have found, and I say it, I have the privilege of being a cheerleader to a lot of women. Right, 85% of my clients are females, and I truly love it. But I understand why we succeed. They are exceptional at what they do. I remind them of it. That's all I literally do. Like I speak to their husbands, and they're like, "How is it that you get my wife to do all these things when I can't even get her to?" So firstly, you're not playing to her strengths. Understand what she's exceptional at, and then drive her to just keep doing that better, and give her a break. Find all the areas where she could actually benefit from having other people come in. And they look at me and it's like, is that why we got a cleaner this week that came in the house? I said, well, she's working 60 hours a week. What do you expect? So we're making enough money. And so they're like, oh, I get it. So now you look like the good guy. I said, well, if you'd offered it, you would have looked like the good guy. And it's just, we play on this. But what I'm saying is, one of the things that I've found about female founders and businesswomen is they don't back themselves enough, and that's the thing that drives me crazy, because it's like, and what I teach Lavender, my daughter, is, honey, you back yourself. If your brother's giving you a hard time, you go back twice as hard. And boy, she's a 3-year-old who definitely gives it back. And I encourage that, because I want her to know that, because she's also a little bit subservient. She'll do things for Leo all the time, and if he's mean to her, she'll be really sweet to him. I'm like, wait for it. You don't have to be kind just because he's your older brother. Like, if he's mean to you, you call it out and come and find me and we'll deal with it. You don't sit there and absorb that shit, because you don't have to. And I say that to my clients, I say it to my female cousins all the time. It's like, stand up for yourself. You don't need me to stand up for you. You can stand up. You have more power than you think you do. And I think that that's wonderful and courageous that we can talk about that. And the vulnerability you have to have. Do you have any business heroes? Anyone that you, over the years, have admired or modelled yourself against? Is there anyone in particular that you think?
I would definitely say my dad has been he would, hero is an interesting term, but I would definitely say dad. And I've sort of, I think in terms of, and hero come mentor, Bill Spur's been a significant mentor in my life. He was head of TAFE when I went through TAFE. then he hired me at the Adelaide Convention Bureau, and then Australian Major Events started, and he hired me there. He put faith in me at a much younger age, possibly, than I deserved, but he really gave me some fairly incredible opportunities. And
he's now at the Adelaide Convention Centre, ABM chair.
Yes, yeah. And dear Bill, he even said over the years, even through his wife Helen, he said, God, I'm almost going to have to marry you soon if you can't get a successful relationship. I think there's been sort of a number of people over the years that I've looked at. Hero's an interesting term, but there've definitely been other people. I mean, I really enjoy working with Martin. Is he a hero? I think he's outstanding at what he does, and so.
I use the term hero loosely.
Yeah.
It's like having a superhero hero in your life.
A superhero, yeah. Well,
someone who makes you feel, that's why, for me, I figured you'd say your dad.
Yeah.
I remember doing my first AICD course training with Bill Spur back in 2005, when we both went and did AICD, when no one even knew what it was. And, for me, it was the feds that said you need to go do this, because I was sitting on some federal boards, and I was, I think, 26 years old, and it was like, what am I doing all this for, and what is all this stuff? And it was brilliant. But I remember doing that with Bill, and he was an amazing man then. So
he still is.
I can just imagine what he's developed into, and he did a lot for the Convention Bureau and the industry.
And Tourism Commission. He's just been an incredible contributor, and he's just he's been a terrific influence in my life in a work sense, and just being able to manage through things. And the lovely thing is he now sort of says how proud he is of some of the achievements, which is really lovely, that it sort of almost comes back full circle.
I think if I was to look at what my ideal legacy would be that having people that I've mentored and helped along their journey, and then they're living their best life. And I think that's probably I can't speak on behalf of Bill, but I'm assuming that's what he'd be going through now as a person, excuse me, that's had a huge influence in the lives of many people along the journey. And hopefully you will have that with all the people that you've touched along the way too. You must have some pretty quirky or structured beliefs or habits for you to be able to achieve what you achieve. Is there anything you want to share that someone else out there that is listening could benefit from? Any habits or beliefs that have helped you and will continue to aid you in your journey?
Yeah, I think, my mother always said to me, darling, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Be ready to listen. And I think, you talked about that skill earlier in terms of chairing a board, is that it's not about necessarily driving the conversation, but being able to bring it together and to summarise it, to be hearing what people are saying, and then to be able to articulate that back and get consent and things. So I think that's one. I think respect is incredibly important. We certainly grew up in an environment where, you just respected everybody, and that's what you were taught as a child: respect your elders and do all of those things. Well, I think we were, and that's a great foundation. And I think now more than that, I want to be able to demonstrate my behaviour to earn that respect, and never assume it. I also remember learning from a fairly young age, perhaps in my late teens, from a friend of my parents, and he said, never go to a boss with a problem, always go with a range of solutions. And it's something that I've really stood by as well. And I think it's very easy sometimes to be the solution provider. And because I'm a solution provider type of person, it's really easy to solve those problems for other people. But if you can give them those skills to say, how do you think, what do you think the options would be? And I'll do that with Maggie now. She says, how do you spell something? Well, how do you think you spell it? Let's just give it a crack. So that's a very basic example of it.
I don't think it's so basic. I think it's funny. Every time I interview someone, there's a lesson in it for me, and that's still a big lesson. I have a lot of my mentors who say to me, Christian, you have got a career. I mean, in my advisory firm, all I do is solve problems, and it's so hard to then walk into a board meeting as a chair where I've actually got to go, okay, let's extract the idea. And I have to remind myself. And just then, when you said that, I thought, I do that with my kids. And it was really important. So it wasn't really basic. It was actually
Yeah.
the right message.
Yeah.
And I think anyone listening it's an aha moment where you go, it's because people don't realise it's really hard being a solutions person.
Yes.
Because the frustration that I'm assuming the same, you get really frustrated when people can't solve their own problem. Now I get paid for it, so it's great. But sometimes I look at some of my clients and I go, you realise you could have solved that yourself. You didn't need me. It wasn't really a complex problem. And I have to be really careful with clients, particularly my clients that have been with me for 2 or 3 years, where I have to sort of say, hang on a minute, you're now becoming dependent on me.
Yes.
Where therefore I'm not teaching you the right way.
Yep.
And then we'll have a strategy workshop and we reframe. And so I've been using a lot of reframing techniques. And some people look at me and go, psychology is the next thing on your agenda? I was like, no, I'm just trying to be helpful, because if something happened to me, then you just become codependent on my thinking, and I can't have that. And I think that's a really beautiful message that you just put there.
Yeah, you almost want to make yourself redundant. I mean, that's what success looks like in some ways. And it does take a little bit of extra time, it can, but that investing in that with, whether it's a colleague or a client or your child, in giving them those skills. And I think for me the other, I guess the final piece would be recognising where, if you've got to be pulling a team together, recognising the skills that you don't have, bringing the right people, really thinking about diversity, not because of a quota, but because of the benefit that diversity brings, and then make sure you can, where appropriate, publicly recognise those people for the contribution that they've made, because that's really, really important. So
you just said something that I want to ask you the question about. As a chair, and a female chair, in often male-dominated boards, right? You've got to try and create this diversity. I know that I know, because we've talked about this in the past, gender balance isn't really a thing in terms of, like, you have to hit that quota, right?
I don't like quotas.
Yeah,
no.
That's right. You and I have talked about this, and I'm just conscious I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So I'm glad you just agreed. And so we've had that conversation before, because I struggle with quotas, because I look at it and go, I've been taught to hire the best person regardless. And I think in hospitality in particular, we just hire the best. You don't have a choice. It's not, let me go and pick whether you're male or female. And I look at my businesses, and as I said, most of them are female-led, or in fact all of them but my own, right, is in the one that I run, and I'm surrounded by women. So I kind of go, okay, well, hang on, am I fitting a quota? No. I like working with women. I think they're smarter, they're more organised, they tick the bill everywhere that I go in the businesses that I'm involved in. But on a board, how do you overcome that challenge of being a woman? Because I reckon this would be a big challenge. I can't say I experienced a challenge because I'm not a female, but how do you overcome this push for quotas and yet find the right balance? Let's say you just can't find, say, the women that fit that, because I like the way you think about diversity of skills, and that's what makes a great board.
Yes.
I totally.
Yep.
So how do you find those people?
I mean, first and foremost, it's I think skills-based boards are really important. So that's got to be the first sort of factor, and making sure that if it's an existing board, and earlier this year I was involved in developing a board from scratch, but it's unusual to have that scenario. And I think it's a really important practice for boards to undertake a skills assessment, a self-assessment, because then, particularly when you're looking at succession planning, you can look at, where do we have gaps and what do we need for the particular industry sector, or, business SAs across many different industry sectors. So I think that discipline of being able to review that annually can be a really important practice.
Yeah, cool. So is that what you use as a foundation?
Yeah, as a foundation, I think that as a tool, undertake a skills analysis and look at what is going to be right for the organisation that you're looking for. And then I personally like to think that I believe that there is incredible value with that diversity piece amongst gender, amongst age, race, and amongst ethnicity. Yeah. Really important. And so at Business SA, we've got in our board, we've got older and more mature contributors. We've got some younger participants. We're now going to be bringing in as of this early next year, we're going to have a regional representative, which I think is really important that we can actually, looking at bringing in a board decision that says we will always have a person from a region and we'll rotate that. That's really important.
That's a great idea.
So I like to think that it's just a way of forming boards that works for me in terms of not just for me, but to achieve the goals of the organisation. And
so you almost take the emphasis away in interpreting your response. You take the emphasis away from a quota. You
Yes.
kind of just go not going to even think about it. But essentially, what you look at is what are the skills that I need around the table, and I want to fill them with the best people.
Yes.
And then at the end of it, it plays out how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can overlay. I think it's really important to overlay it with that diversity, so that you are looking at it and saying, if I can get the best people for the job, and I also get the outcome that is with diversity in those areas that I've talked about, then I think you will be able to, you'll have a healthy, because it's about creating a culture. And this year, when we've formed the Adelaide Economic Development Agency, and in fact we've just appointed an advisory committee, and I really think that if you can get that culture right, you will be much more able to succeed. And for me, the culture is best driven by not just the skills, but it's a diversity piece as well. So looking at both of those to be able to be able to bring together the right group, because if you can create that culture, you will achieve together, and you'll also create a respectful environment where people can feel that they can challenge each other and they can have different points of view, but they can do that in a really healthy environment, and I believe you're able to achieve more success in that way.
Love it. I actually really like that response, and I think it is such a challenge for women leaders, right? But leaders in general too. See, again, I even hate saying the fact women leaders, because I just look at it, we're all leaders. If we're in a position of leadership, your gender is irrelevant. It's just such a challenging world that we live in, because you have to be politically correct. And even I sometimes sit there and Lucy will look at me and she just say what you just said. I'm like, what did I say? And she goes, Christian, people's interpretation of what you say is what you've got to be careful about. I said, I honestly have to sit here and think about what everyone's thinking. I wouldn't even be alive. I mean, bottom line is people tend to forget I'm still an entrepreneur. I've got a risk appetite that other people don't have. And actually, on the weekend, I actually had someone say to me, you're chairman of Bohu Engineering, a really conservative 30-year-old family business. How on earth did they find you? I said, you'd be surprised when I'm playing with other people's money how conservative I can be. I said, my risk appetite is my own, but then I've got to, as a chair, I've got to have everyone else's risk appetite measured and go, okay, well, what are we going to do? But that doesn't, and I think this is where entrepreneurs are now being looked upon in a really cool light, particularly for board roles. It's something I've found now, is that a lot of people that reach out to me and say, look, you're an entrepreneur, we need an entrepreneur on our board. Is that the skill set that you're missing? I say to them. And they're like, yeah, but do you know what the skill set is? I said, because just because someone has a title entrepreneur, is it the risk that you want? You want someone to look at risk differently? Do you want someone to, understand, what makes that entrepreneur who they are? I mean, a tech entrepreneur is going to be very different to a recruitment entrepreneur, because their attitude is, very different focuses. But what I'm finding is that I'm seeing diversity and inclusion really changing at the moment, and the landscape is very exciting. And I mean that across all sectors, not just one or two in particular. I know we're going to be short for time. 2 questions is all I got left.
Right.
1, are you a reader?
Yes.
Great. Which book or books do you think have greatly influenced your life?
Well, interesting, because I was just given this book by the National Australia Day Council by Dr. Robert Isaacs.
Okay.
It's called 2 Cultures, One Story. And Dr. Robert Isaacs was actually, he was a child of the stolen generation.
Okay.
And it's an incredible story, and particularly given the role that I'm now having, which is, running the Australian of the Year Awards and the Australia Day programs, and influencing what occurs in each state. And obviously it's a hot topic. In fact, many of my friends have said, you've got that appointment, when will you change the date, change the flag, change this, change that? And even as a child of the stolen generation, Robert Isaac says, this is about respecting who we are as a country, reflecting on who we've been in the past, celebrating the great, wonderful, diverse ethnicities that make us truly a fantastic country, and celebrating that into the future, so we can look at the past and we can reflect on that. We can reflect on how people were treated very poorly, but it shouldn't define us. So that's just been a fantastic book. Yeah. That's been a great learning.
And it's also serving you in the role that you're in.
Yeah, it is serving me in the role.
Because it gives you the answers to answer some of those really difficult questions that
Absolutely.
people are throwing at you.
Yeah, so I like to read true, and then I also like to read, I'm actually reading a really pathetic, I can't even tell you what the title is, but it's just some sort of romantic book that someone gave me.
Mills and Boons. Please tell me you're not reading the Mills and Boons.
It's certainly not a Mills and Boons.
Right, okay. The only reason I know Mills and Boons is my mother used to read them as a kid, and I'm like, what are these?
Yeah, no. I do like to go from sort of quite intense, heavy, whether it's an autobiography or a biography, and then into something very, very light, especially if I'm poolside and trying to tune off.
Right, okay, so in another podcast another day I might have different questions for you.
Perfect.
To try and understand the behavioural psychology around that. But anyway, lastly, and probably my favourite question that I love asking, you've already answered some of these, but I sometimes when I reframe the question, it gives people a different answer. What's your top 3 lessons that you'd impart on life or in business to another driven and smart business person?
I think what I've learned that's benefited me well is to actually, not have the answer straight away, to take time and think about it. And I still will often draft an email, close it, put it away, have a think about it, and not even send it till the next day.
Love it.
So I think that's an important one. I tended, perhaps when I was a bit younger, to sort of shoot from the hip and really do that. So I think, listening, thinking, and taking your time to respond. I do still think, and speaking of books, it relates to this, but, I didn't, at school when I was asked to read To Kill a Mockingbird, it didn't make sense to me. I don't think I was smart enough to understand it, and now in my 20s when I read it again, and that's another thing that resonates with me, is when you're thinking about decisions or you're thinking about what you're saying to someone, it's to really think about it from their point of view and to walk around in their shoes. And we're in such a fast-paced life. We don't think about the answers because we can Google really quickly to respond, but I think taking your time and being able to think about the impact of what you say or what you do and what that has on other people is a really important one.
Beautiful.
There's 2, and I think the one I mentioned before, probably thinking about a problem and coming with solutions, just as a sort of a frame of mind. I think whether that's in business or in personal, that's another one that I would say is really worth considering.
Nikki, I particularly like the wisdom that you've shared with us today, and I know that it's going to resonate with a lot of our listeners. I'm going to have a lot of fun re-listening to it. I've taken a solid page of notes, and one of the things that really resonated with something you said really earlier, and it's also Jim Collins' theory, which is first who, then what. I think the story about the star, and I think also the way that you seek out the right people for the right job in the right company. I don't know if you're familiar with Jim Collins' work, but he's an ex-Stanford professor. Wrote Good to Great, which most people have read. But you really, when you speak, I can see a lot of his teachings in there, which are very simple, which is first who, then what. And you've taken that not only in your career, but you in terms of your own businesses, but then actually that's what you're doing now in your roles on a board. You're really looking at it and saying, okay, well, who have I got sitting around the table, and how are you going to serve what we're trying to do? And I think that's probably the biggest thing that's come through interviewing you today, is that, and that doesn't always come through. Like all the other people, I know that that's something their focus is there, it's on there. But for you, really, it is actually one of your foundations. And I think that's really neat because that's actually really hard to do. Most people are thinking already, what are we meant to do, as opposed to who do we need to do that first. And that's something that's really come through for me. And I really appreciate that. I really appreciate your time. I know that you're incredibly busy.
We're all busy.
Yeah, we're all busy.
Remember?
Yep, that's right.
You're busy, but you've done this.
Your
so
dad's voice, David's voice, is now ringing in my ears. You can't say busy, right? But no, I know that you being here, attending to this interview, is incredibly valuable to me and our listeners, and I really appreciate it. I know that I'm going to keep looking forward to the work you do. I'm blessed that we're friends and I get to see you at events and other bits and pieces, and you're always so willing to share, and I think that's what makes you really special, and I really appreciate your time today, so thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute honour to be included in this group, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Easy.